Before I bring Catherine up here, I am going to exit out of this PowerPoint and open hers up.
Onions, potatoes.
You want them together or no?
Don't worry about it now.
And if you are joining us on Zoom, make sure that you are muted. And let's go ahead and share presentation. All right. Marcy, are you seeing the presentation on the computer screen back there over Zoom? No, okay, give me one moment. Sometimes technology is extremely helpful. Sometimes it is extremely frustrating. There it is.
Gallery view.
We are almost there. Just give it a second. The computer here is having a little bit, it's frozen a little bit. We're almost there, I promise. All right. Now we are in business. All right, I'm gonna hand over the mic to Catherine.
Hello, is this working?
Yes.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Appreciate you introducing me. So I'm very excited to be here this evening with, am I echoing or is it just me? No. I'm echoing, okay. Nicole, I'm echoing, I guess. I'm not sure how to make it better, or I'll mess with it, but I'll probably break it if I do.
Maybe it's just too close.
Okay, is this better? Okay. Thank you. I'm really excited to be here this evening, and so many of you have braved the storm. I really appreciate it. And those of you at home, I hope you are safe and bundled up and warm. So tonight I'll be talking about native perennial grasses, what they are, why they're important, and how you can preserve and establish them on your property. We have some little display tables up front. I encourage you to look at them if you haven't already during the break, and sign up to take some of the plugs, the baby seedlings, or the seeds home with you. We'll divvy them up though at the end, so don't take any of them with you yet. We want to make sure we fairly divide them among everyone. Throughout the presentation, I'll give a little information on all of these grasses I'm giving out tonight. These are not the only species that are native to our area and that would work really well either in a garden context or on a landscape context. These are just the ones that I could get, and that I thought would be a nice cross section. So whether you're wanting to plant them in a wet area or a dry area, there'd be something that would work for everyone. So here is the first native perennial grass I'd like you to meet tonight. How many of you know about blue wild rye? Lots, some? Okay. So there's 2 photos of it here on the slide, and then 1 map. It's showing basically Roseburg south to Wairika, and then the coast to the mountains. The dots, don't mind the different colors, that's just showing subspecies. The dots show where blue wild rye has been found. So basically, it's all over. It's very prevalent in our area. It's generally widespread in Western North America. It likes moist habitats, including like the upland area of riparian habitats. Don't plant it right in the middle of the stream. It also, though, does okay and likes prairies, grasslands, meadows, and other open places. It's drought tolerant. All of the native perennial grasses are. And it grows, it's pretty tall. It grows to 1 to 5 feet tall and about 1 foot wide. So it's big. And it's competitive with non-native species, which is a good thing. It also can be weedy, so it can take over. So be a little wary. It's good for erosion control, keeping banks in place so they don't, decide to go wandering off. It's really good forage quality, people say, but it's not very tolerant of heavy grazing. It is known to support at least 1 moth species, probably supports a bunch of other insects, and certainly native wildlife. So next, I'll show a roadmap of where we'll be going during the presentation. We'll start off with some definitions just to get us all on the same page. And then I'll go into the importance of perennial grasses and some of the pros of them, the history they have in our area. Then we'll do a brief foray into identification, not a botanist foray into identification. Then quick break. Then talk about how to preserve the perennial grasses you already have on your property and how to establish new ones and get new populations going. I'm hoping we'll have quite a bit of time at the end for questions and discussions. I'm very sure there's a lot of knowledge in this room, and I want to learn from you, and I hope you can learn from each other as well. So, definitions. First off, what is a perennial plant? And with these, I'm hoping to get some audience participation. So just call out your answers and don't wait for me to call on you. So perennial plant. Yep. So yeah, it's a plant that can persist many growing seasons. Okay, next one. What is a grass? Yeah, yeah. Any other?
I didn't hear the answer.
Monocot, someone answered. Several people answered. Okay, this one's more tricky, and people generally don't pay a lot of attention to grasses. So yeah, like you said, monocot, it's a subgroup of flowering plants. The other group is the dicots. And so what all that means is that when they sprout from seed, they put up 1 leaf instead of 2 leaves. And so it's mono, 1 cotyledon leaf, basically. The grasses are in the family Poaceae. It's the old name is Graminy. I never learned it under that. So Poaceae. They have generally narrow leaves with parallel veins, hollow stems, and these swollen nodes along the stems of the grass. Other plants will have that too, but you can't go up to a plant and say, "Hi, what family are you in?" So those can be a good way to distinguish grasses from some of the other monocots that might look like a grass. Okay, next definition. Am I on the Okay, I think I'm on the right side. Okay, so what is a native plant? Any volunteers?
Something that's indigenous to the area.
Yeah. Any other? Yeah, so just like you were saying, something that, well, I mean, there's some controversy about this, to be honest, which I don't want to try to get into too much, but for our purposes, it's something that's been present for a long period of time and co-evolved with all the other stuff from that area. So native animals, plants, insects, etc., at a specific location. Okay. Next one, what is a non-native plant, or what's an invasive plant? Something terrible, okay? Any other takers?
Not native.
Not native, yeah, it's in the name.
It doesn't have any, competition. There's less of insects that, are familiar with it, and so we more likely to reproduce.
Yeah, exactly. So not competition and more likely to reproduce. So again, this definition, people have some controversy over the definitions here. But yeah, it's not co-evolved with everything else in the system, no native predators, so it can take over an area. And some non-native plants, not all of them, but some have traits that we really don't like spikes on star thistle or Himalayan blackberry. And they'll change the landscape in ways that we don't like, we find less than desirable. So that leads on to what are native perennial grasses. It's basically in the name. So they're native to our region. They're perennial, so they live multiple years. Some live a couple years, short-lived. Some, you can't exactly date them very easily like you can trees, but they will live like up to 100 years. So we're talking long-lived to just multiple years. And so mostly in our region, the perennial grasses are bunch grasses. So that means they look kind of like a ponytail. And so they come up from the ground in a fairly small area and are upright, kind of branching out. And they're an important and beneficial component of a lot of our habitats. Sure, grasslands and prairies, but also oak woodlands and mixed conifer forests and riparian areas. And they're threatened by both invasive species and by land use and management, both historical and current. So let me introduce you to another perennial grass species. So this is bottlebrush squirreltail. It's a favorite of mine. I find it very cute. It's very drought tolerant. It likes disturbed rocky soils, and it has pretty low nutrient needs. It likes full sun. It can handle partial shade, but don't overwater it. It grows about 2 feet tall, 1 to 2 feet, and it's also good for erosion control. And it's also, like blue wild rye, a better competitor against non-native grasses, which also means that it can get weedy. So, you know, flip side. It's palatable to livestock when it's young, but when the mature flowers they get spiky, and they can get stuck in animals' fur and aren't that nice to chew on. So if you're looking for something that has good palatability, this is maybe not your species, depending. It also supports a bunch of butterflies and moths. And it's fairly common in our region, maybe not as widespread as blue wild rye, but it's still common in the drier areas. So I'll move on to importance next. So I'm going to start from kind of a historical perspective. Most of the information that I'm getting for this historic perspective is coming from one study done in 2008 by Paul Hostin, Eugene, and Frank Lang. And they are people who really know this area well, or knew this area well, and their plants. So for thousands of years, native peoples of this region managed the landscape with lots of different tools, and that included fire as one of them. Historically, perennial grasses were important to over 70% of the land area in the Rogue Valley. There was apparently about 30%, 31% prairie, like 0.4% shrubland, 1.2% savanna, woodland was 41%. And so all of those had perennial grasses as a major component. Then closed forests, 24%, 25%, yeah, not probably that many perennial grasses. And then closed forest, riparian wetland, also probably not that many perennial grasses, maybe. So here's a quote that will illustrate how things looked prior to the land use changes in the 1800s and invasive species. I have asked Art if he will read off quotes, so go ahead.
The wild grasses grew in profusion, covering everywhere the land was with a garment of the softest and most luxuriant verdure.
Thank you. Then unfortunately, the native populations of perennial grasses declined. There were probably lots of factors, and depending on where you are, they would interact in different ways. But among those would be overgrazing, competition with the non-native species that were being introduced at that point, woody encroachment, agriculture, and urbanization. Here's a quote to illustrate what happened, if I can get you again, Art.
Repeated burning has done much to destroy the original stand of timber, and combined with premature grazing, have heavily increased the browse species and practically eliminated the perennial grasses.
Okay. Yeah, and then another one from slightly earlier. Go ahead. This is from like the 1800s-ish.
The sheep killed about all of the good grass that used to grow around that part of Timber Mountain. The area was overgrazed year after year by both the sheep and cattle, and it became more dust than anything else. After the grass was gone, weeds had a chance to get a foothold, and now the woods have taken the place of the grass that used to grow so abundantly.
So here is a photo they included of in that report. This is of near Hilt. So the first photo, the top one, is from 1880, and the bottom one is from 2006. So you can see a decrease in the bunch grasses. Those are the native perennial grasses. And then an increase in the number of woody species. Those include like buckbrush, juniper, and white oak in this particular photo near Hill, California. If you're interested, this report has lots of historical photographs compared with modern photographs, and it's a very interesting read. Okay, so moving on from that, I'll switch to some of the benefits of perennial grasses. Why should we care about them? Why do we want to promote them, promote their growth? So first off, roots and soil. They really help with water infiltration and drainage. They have deep roots, but also wide roots and really fine roots that will help decrease compaction and help water get into the soil rather than just running off. They'll increase soil stability, so they'll control erosion. Just all those little root hairs will just keep the soil in place. They can also increase soil health, so compaction, beneficial microbes, they help those things. Then fire. So as Rachel said during her class, which was wonderful, any plant will burn. That includes these native grasses. I'm comparing these to invasive annual grasses, which tend on the whole to be more flammable. I'm not talking about your well-watered yard. I'm talking about the field that goes dry during the summertime. So native perennial grasses tend to be less flammable, so catch on fire in the first place, and then less likely to carry fire across the landscape. They tend to be spaced out more. So if one bunch burns, it'll burn, but it might not catch the next bunch on fire, type of thing. These grasses are also adapted to fire, and so they can resprout after they've been burned, which is nice. Then wildlife habitat. So as I've mentioned, a lot of these perennial grasses are food, building materials, hiding places for a bunch of different species, everything from elk to insects to rabbits to deer to everyone basically. And so you're thinking both of their seeds, which lots of animals will eat, but also their leaves and even their roots for things that are underneath the ground. Livestock. Generally, perennial grasses are really good forage. They're, depending on the grass, of course, they tend to be both palatable and nutritious, and they can be green and give nutrition in the early part of the season, and then in the late part of the season when a lot of the other grasses, if unwatered, have already died back. And then for landscaping, so they can be pretty. I mean, I don't know how hard of a sell it's going to be with this group to convince you that grasses are pretty. I like grasses. They can also be hardy once established. So once they get there, they can be pretty hard to kill. They can be low maintenance. You don't have to do anything to them. And then also low water. One of the fastest ways to kill them is water them too much. Let me introduce you to woodland brome. So this ranges from Washington down to Baja California. It's again a little less common in our region, but still around. It likes partially shaded areas to full sun. It likes like shrublands, woodlands, forest, riparian areas. It's less of a like open meadow type of grass. It tends to grow 1.5 feet to 5 feet tall. So huge range. I think it mostly depends on like water and soil nutrients. It has this droopy flower head, which is pretty showy and unique for the perennial grasses. It's drought tolerant, but less so than bottlebrush squirreltail. It also likely supports several species of moths and butterflies. A lot of the research, they say likely supports, so I don't think they know for sure. So identification is next. This is not going to be a formal way to ID anything. And if they're botanists in the audience, I might very well be horrifying them. This is a quick and dirty way to identify. So grass ID, it's not always easy. A lot of people are scared of grasses. So here are just some things to look at if you were trying to identify a grass or something you think might be a grass, or if you're trying to bring it to someone else to identify, take a photo of it, physically bring in the plant. If it has flowers, you want to have those. Seeds, also important. Leaves, where the leaf and the stem connect. There's like a collar that people will look at in different shapes the collar can make. And then stem can be important. And I was sharing this with a botanist friend, and she said, just tell them to bring the whole plant in, dig it up and bring the roots. Depending on how many there are, I might not encourage you to dig them up. I mean, you don't want to kill them. And if you're bringing it in, it will kill them. But roots are important too. So I'd encourage you to take advantage of local experts and web-based tools. There are people who are from this region, in this region, who know these grasses really, really well. And there's also a lot of web-based tools that are using, I don't know, artificial intelligence and so on. I don't know the background of how they work, and crowdsourcing to identify and help you identify plants. So where to start with ID, if this is the quick and dirty? So I will start with grass versus not grass. So all grasses, they'll have narrow leaves with parallel veins. If it has a big floppy leaf, not a grass. It'll have grass looking flowers. So if you see, 6 petals, 5 petals, pretty colors, not a grass. It won't have a petiole. So what a lot of plants that aren't grasses will have is they'll have their leaf, and then they'll have a little narrow section that connects the leaf to the stem, and that's the petiole. So grasses won't have that. It stays that same width to the leaf, or the leaf stays the same width to the stem, and it connects at the same width. Generally, they'll have hollow stems, but then they'll have these stem nodes. Those are not hollow. They're almost like elbows, and sometimes the stem will change direction at them. They're just like these little knobs. And then seeds will have awns. So on the seed, there's just this little hair at the end. And I'm not sure if other species that are not grasses have it, but it's a pretty grassy thing. A warning, other monocots, so bulbs, rushes, sedges, can look like grasses. So just by the by, it's worth noting. Then perennial versus annual. I will use a tug test that was taught to me by a UC reserve manager. If you have an adult plant, not a seedling, an adult plant, if you pull on it, and if you can pull it up easily, the whole plant, it's probably an annual. If you can't pull it up, it's probably a perennial because it has the bigger root system. Also bunch form. So if you see lots and lots of stems all coming out of one point, that's probably one of the perennial bunch grasses. If it has some living tissue most of the year, if you look down at the base and look really hard in the summer, and you can see some living bits, it's probably a perennial grass, not an annual, or an invasive annual. None of these are 100%, but it'll help you get ballpark. So learn to identify some of the really common non-native and noxious weeds in our area. This won't help you identify natives, and it won't help you identify all of the non-natives because there's a lot of them, but most of the non-native plants we have that are covering most of the area and causing problems are also noxious weeds, and they're covering the majority of the area. So if you learn to recognize yellow stud thistle and medusa head and cheatgrass, some of those you'll recognize, oh, hello, you're not who I'm looking for. And there's lists of those. I can provide resources for where to find those. Let me introduce you to another native perennial bunch grass. So this is California fescue. It likes growing in woodlands, mixed conifer forest, chaparral, and open meadows. It's 1 to 4 feet tall, 1 foot wide, and it likes sun to part shade. I tend to think of it as liking more shade than some of the other ones. It'll tolerate a range of soils, and it prefers though loamy soils or clayey soils. It doesn't really like sand that much. Good for erosion control, and it supports a range of butterflies, caterpillars, and birds. Again, found quite a bit all over our region. Don't mind the different colors, that's just different subspecies. Drought tolerant, and it has medium palatability. I think now's a good time for a break, if that works for you guys. So 10 minutes, I think it's 6:33, so 6:45. Okay.
All right, we're gonna move on. We go back to some questions I had up here. Can you let us know what the colored symbols mean from the Oregon flora maps? There were some triangles, circles, squares, and different colors.
So I'm not 100% sure offhand. My memory is the different colors and different symbols are showing either different subspecies, so that's different variants within the species, or it's showing what the samples are. So are they crowdsourced? Are they from something like iNaturalist, or are they herbarium specimens? basically either it's talking about the source of the information or it's talking about the subspecies of the plant.
Okay, great. Thank
Oh,
you.
and the big dots that have a number in them, the map does that when it can't display all the little dots because they're on top of each other. So a big circle with a 15 in the middle means there's 15 little dots in that area.
Excellent. All right, is the reduction of the woody species in the photograph from the 1800s due to the use of regular fire or due to logging and clearing?
I think that photograph is showing that there was fewer woody species in the 1800s and more woody species now. So my understanding is that there was grazing, which hit the native perennials pretty hard, introduction of non-native grasses. By grazing, I mean overgrazing, grazing to nothing. Introduction of the non-native invasive species, and then lack of regular fire and lack of people clearing the area by other means. And so that's allowed the woody species to grow into the area.
Excellent. Are folks on Zoom able to hear me on the speaker as well? Yes, okay. Just making sure. We are going over questions through the chat. There was a question about what we were talking about. I'm just reviewing a couple questions from the chat before we resume the presentation. Could you offer examples of native perennial non-bunch grasses?
No. I don't know if there are already. Someone probably correct me if I'm wrong, but I think most of them, all of them are bunch grasses. Anyone have, can you think of any that are not bunch grasses? Anyone? Okay. There is like a handful on that topic, a handful of native annual grasses, but there's like probably less than 10 of them, and maybe less than 5. The majority of the annual grasses that are here are non-native annuals.
Thank you. The report you were referring to at the beginning, with the historical pictures, what was that report again?
That was done, I need to pull it up. If I can get back to you on that. It was done by Frank Lang, who was a longtime professor at Southern Oregon University, and also either 2 people from the BLM or 1 person from the BLM. I'm not recalling off the top of my head. But I'll include that in the fact sheet for people to be able to look up.
Wonderful, thank you. Are there native grasses that can outcompete Medusa head?
It depends how you're managing it. Probably. I mean, I hope so. I'm doing a research project up in Central Point. That's where some of my graduate thesis research is being done on Medusa head and what can outcompete Medusa's head. So I really hope so. But I think it depends what the situation is. What are you doing as far as grazing, as far as weather, as far as all sorts of different things.
Can you keep native bunch grasses from going summer dormant with supplemental irrigation? And are there species that don't like irrigation in the summer?
A gardener from this area might be a better person to answer this question definitively. My thought would be that some summer irrigation might be fine for all of them. The ones that are more tolerant and like wet soil better. So species like blue wild rye, for instance, they would probably tolerate it more. You definitely can kill the native grasses by over irrigating them. So I'm not sure where that line is between irrigating too much and not enough. Some of them I think just go dormant because that's how they're programmed, but there's some of them you could probably coax through and have be greener.
Are there species that do better establishing from direct broadcast seedling or hydro seedling?
Probably yes. I'm not sure. I think, yeah, I'm not sure, to be honest. I think it depends on your site. It depends on what you're going to do after you plant them. I'm not sure if it might be a species to species thing, but I suspect it might have more to do with your site and how you prepared the site, what you'll do after you've planted.
Right.
Yeah, please.
I would say it's a size factor, and seeding is good for small areas. Hydro seeding, if you've got a lot of acres or, more than a half an acre, say.
So, can you repeat your question? Or not question, your answer?
Okay, I would say, that hand seeding is best for small areas. And hydro seeding is best for large areas, and large, I would say, it's up to you, I guess, but maybe more than a half an acre to an acre. So it's coming down to what's practical. Yeah, in my experience.
Thank you. I think you're probably very right about that.
I don't know what hydro seeding.
I have not done it. I've just hand seeded, and you're right, with larger areas. Labor.
Can you recommend a resource for which grasses are native to a given ecosystem? For example, we live in Oak Chaparral ecosystem. How do I find out what grasses are native here?
I'll cover that a little bit later on, if I can hold that question and then re-ask if it's not clear.
Okay. Then got that in. Again, it gets missed. The image that you're currently showing on the screen, is the meadow primarily native grasses or is it a mixture?
I'm hoping this is primarily native grasses. I didn't take the photo myself. It's from the Understory Initiative. And so I imagine they would be showing off a pretty meadow with mostly native grasses. I'm not sure.
And we have one more question in the chat and then we'll give Stan another opportunity to unmute. The last question I have, once the non-native grasses take hold, how can you best bring back the native grasses?
That is the question. And we'll cover it later on in the talk, but bring it back up again. And that's the question that I wish I knew the answer to.
All right, and Stan, I see your hand raised in the Zoom. Are you able to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Actually, it was a mistake that I raised my hand. I might have questions later, but say hi to everybody there.
Hi, Stan. They say hi. Thanks, Stan. Does anyone here in the room have questions since we opened it up for the online people?
All right, before you ask the question, let me bring you a microphone. That is the only way the folks on Zoom can hear.
Thanks, Nicole.
So there are plugs in the front of the room, and so if we were to go and plant those now, are the conditions going into winter gonna tolerate and gonna handle this kind of weather?
These poor grasses, they were germinated in a greenhouse in Davis, so very cushy conditions, everything they could want. Then they had a road trip and they went to the North Coast Range in California, were there for a few days while I was working on research plots. And then they came up to Central Point. And so I think these guys were a little stressed out at the moment. I would be. I'd recommend watering them and bringing them into like a garage or somewhere, a more sheltered area the first couple of nights, since there could be people from 4,000 feet who are here, and then people who are valley floor who are here. So get them used to your conditions slowly, just like you would with any plant. And then, yeah, plant them out. This is the perfect time to plant them so they can get their root systems established while it's wet and there's lots of water available. They can kind of, figure out what's what before they're trying to do something and grow in the springtime or before they get hit by the drought in the summer.
If you're reclaiming a plant, do you use one species or can you mix different variety of different grasses together in one area?
You can definitely mix different species of grasses together in one area. I would think before just mixing everything together. So if it's a dry area, mix species that are happy with dry areas together, or if it's a wet area, mix species that are happy with wet. You might not get a huge amount of diversity depending on who's happy there. So you might have one species that really, really grows. You don't want to waste seed or plants. I also would recommend overseeding. So putting a lot of seed in, and then hopefully something will survive and sprout. And even if it doesn't sprout this year, it'll sprout next year type of thing.
Okay, so I wasn't clear about that you think that we should acclimate the seeds themselves, just take the seeds, are you talking about putting them in on top of it?
No, acclimate the little baby seedlings.
Oh.
The seed should be fine.
You mentioned that you're doing some research with Medusa head. Are you seeing any trends early in your research in terms of grasses that might compete well with Medusa head?
Right now, we're not doing that part of the research. Right now, I'm repeating some experiments that were done in the 70s in Reno, Nevada, about what does Medusa head and some of these other thatch producing annual non-native grasses, how does that actually change the local environment? Because we know that it suppresses the growth and particularly the seed germination and seedling establishment of a bunch of other species that we might prefer grow there. So what is that thatch actually doing? So we have soil sensors and light sensors and air sensors and all sorts of things measuring stuff. And so, yes, we're definitely seeing differences between native vegetation versus Medusa head versus thatch versus bare ground. So it's really fun. But I don't know yet about who will compete best soon, hopefully.
Along those same lines, with our high severity fires that are happening, my recollection is these grasses tolerate burning, but it's usually low intensity, low severity fires. And are there grasses that you're finding, native grasses that you're finding that are tolerating the higher severity fires? And which ones?
That's sort of a different experiment I'm doing. That's the one in the California Coast Range. We're setting plots on fire and seeing which perennial grasses resprout, how many of them do they resprout when they're babies versus adults. But many of these can resprout pretty well. It depends where they are growing from. Like, is it underground? Is it at ground level? Or is it above the ground? Like where the fire actually hits them. If it's a field composed of just the natives, the vegetation is a lot less connected. It's a lot more sparse. And so there's a lot less heat. It's the annual grasses like Medusa head or some of the other thatch producing dry things that will raise the temperature and carry the fire, making it bigger, making it hotter, all of that. And so if it's just the natives, it won't burn as hot. And some of these can survive and they seem green even after being in super thatchy. But if you're going to build a bonfire on top of them, I don't know yet.
Can you use perennial grasses as a way to improve soil, maybe open it up with their deep roots so that you could then go in and plant other plants at a later date?
Yes, so at Russell Ranch, which is a area outside of UC Davis, they have, I think, a couple hundred acres. That's their strategy. So they are using herbicide really, really heavily because there's no seed bank here. They're using herbicide heavily to kill everything, and then they're planting perennial grasses and continuing using herbicide. The perennials can kind of deal with it depending on when you spray them, to kill all the non-native things. And then once they have the perennial grasses, nicer soil conditions, and no other random weeds coming up, then they're planning on seeding all of the wildflowers and other native plants. I'm not sure. They say it's working for them. I don't know that it's like a done deal. You should do this, but definitely people are thinking about it.
Yeah, so I'm not so compacted with it, free, then we need to go and.
Yeah.
We have lots of deer in our backyard, certainly we love them, and turkeys. How do these perennials, I'm assuming that since they are native, that they can survive the animal browsing, but tell us about deer and other predators that might be munching on them.
They can survive being munched on within reason, I think. Some places have much higher deer populations than they maybe evolved to be used to. So depending on how much the deer want to just use that as the buffet they come to every single day, they're resistant, but they're not perfect. So you also might want to go with a perennial grass that is worse forage quality, because the deer also think it's worse forage quality, hopefully. I mean, psychology of deer. And so if it's worse forage quality for the deer, potentially it's going to survive more. Should we keep going and then?
Yeah, I think that's
Okay.
great. We're going to keep going, and I'm gonna try turning off one of these middle lights and see if that helps the screen a little clearer for folks in the audience.
Okay, did this go down a slide?
Not yet. Now you're on table of contents.
Okay, wonderful. So next up is preservation. So if you have native perennial grasses on your property, the first thing I'd recommend is keep the ones you got, because they've been happy there. And if you can do something to make them happier, all the better. So I would recommend, I mean, first you have to find them. So know what they look like, know what you're looking for. And so identify them as, you don't have to identify them down to the genus, species, subspecies, so on and so forth. It can be good enough to just get this as, this thing is probably a native perennial grass. Or if you can get to genus, like this is a native fescue. That's pretty good. Or you can get down as far as you like. And then map the area where they're growing. So either formally, really, really seriously, or just in your mind, like where is this population? Since they'll tend to grow together, it's not just one grass, it'll tend to be a group of them. And then keep an open mind and reevaluate. So if you're doing it now, you might not be able to see the flowers. So come June, whenever they're flowering, if they flower and you look back at it and say, I think this is actually Medusa head, maybe don't do all of the things that you were planning to protect the Medusa head. So you might want to reevaluate both for the species, but then reevaluate for, is this population getting bigger because of what I'm doing? Or it might not be cause and effect, but is it getting bigger or is it getting smaller? That can help you know your success and also help you just keep tabs on things. Okay, this is kind of an obvious one. Avoid killing them. So if you have a nice population group of native perennial grasses, you want to avoid like super heavy grazing. Tillage can be a big one that will kill them, because if it's like deep tillage, that's uprooting things. Also, things like turning it into your new parking space. I mean, of course, if you have to, you have to, but you might consider. And then timing is important with all of these things. So there's times when these grasses are more sensitive to disturbance than other times. It tends to be when they're sprouting. So kind of now-ish or spring-ish, or else when they're flowering and going to seed. So that tends to be depending on your elevation and, you know, your exposure and all sorts of other things, but that would tend to be vaguely April, May, June, maybe even into July. I mean, if you're at the top of Mount Ashland, probably longer into the season than that. And then how to actually manage the area around them to promote your perennial grasses. Manage the competing plant species. Particularly invasive species. So I'm talking your yellow star thistle, your medusa head, your cheatgrass, all of your annual invasive brome species. And then also woody species. So if you have woody encroachment into what probably used to be a meadowland, or if you have a woodland that is just really thick and overstocked and not much growing on the ground, talk to someone about it probably before chopping down trees, but you might consider thinning that both for fire, it's not a bad idea, but also to get more perennial grass health and establishment on the ground, as well as other species. Some of the possible tools for this include, you know, grazing, mowing, herbicides, thinning, pile burning, hand pulling, solarization. There's so many tools, and which ones work best. That's a good conversation for us to have. It seems to really depend on timing when you do it, and then also like where you are, and sometimes it seems to depend on the phase of the moon too. Sometimes restoration can be a little bit frustrating that way, but timing is important. At least think about when you're doing these things, and do your research so you're not killing desirable species. So whether that be your native perennial grasses, or whether that be, you know, native wildflowers or trees. I talked about thinning, but like all of trees or things like that. Just think before you go and do some of the more large scale things. Let me introduce you to California oatgrass. So this is Danthonia californica. It likes kind of lowland prairies as well as open woodlands and shrublands. And it likes moisture pretty well. It grows to be 2 to 3 feet tall. It likes loamy or clayey soils. And it's used by a lot of songbirds and small mammals too, for food, nesting, hiding area, and then habitat for at least one endangered butterfly, potentially more. It's also good forage for grazing, and it can tolerate grazing and trampling and mowing. People will say this could be something you plant instead of lawn grass. I haven't done it. I don't know if it's actually works instead of lawn grass, but people will claim that. And it really likes, it will grow and spread and can just be the only thing there. And also, I mean, I think the flowers are pretty too. Then on to establishment. So preserve what you got, then how to get more native perennial grasses growing. The first thing is select your site, wherever it is. Sometimes it's kind of a given, and then other times you get more choice. And survey the site to think about the possible impacts you might have on other desirable species. So you don't always you can't always see them if you think about that. But so like animals, insects, they can move away from you, or they might be active at nighttime. And then there's plants like bulbs. They might only be visible during certain times of year, or only come up every couple of years when they get this particular signal. So just, I'm not, do this work. Just keep it at the back of your head to be mindful of what you might be disturbing. And particularly be careful about large scale disturbances. So smaller area is more manageable at first if you're just getting going in this. It's also less disturbance to everything else that's going on. And the grasses can spread also once you get them going. And then more site selections. So you want species selection. You want to get species that fit whatever criteria you're using. So locally native, I think, is a good one, but also size. So if it's going to be right next to your house, maybe not something that's 5 feet tall. And like how much dead plant material it is. Rachel was talking about some of this. And then availability. So a big thing is, can you get either the seedlings or the seeds? And then there's the whole buy versus collect. Purchasing them, there's a variety of different places you can purchase these seeds from. Some species are pretty widely, they have a wide range and they're pretty widely available to buy a seed from nurseries. Some of those might or might not be well adapted for our specific region. And people will think about how, like this goes on to sourcing and ecotypes, where those seeds are from. So like seeds from New Mexico or seeds from Montana, they might work well, they might not. And they also, people are worried about them crossbreeding with the natives who are here and potentially making like all the plants kind of maladapted. Potential, maybe not. They also, you buy the seeds from Montana, you plant them, they might just not sprout. Or they might sprout and do fine because the species is really plastic and it's fine with it. So just think about. You can also buy seeds and plugs from local nurseries and local places, which is wonderful. Sometimes seed selection can be a little harder, and also price can be higher with some of them. But one could argue if you get 1 pound of seed and 80% of them sprout versus if you get 1 pound of seed and 5% of them sprout, which is the better deal? So not saying that will happen, but argument. If you're going to collect seed, definitely, one, make sure you legally can. And then when you're collecting, I've been told it's best practice to collect about 10% of the seeds that are there. So of the plants that are there, you don't want to collect every single seed because then that population might not have a very happy future. So just collect a responsible amount of seeds if you're wild collecting. It also can be useful for species selection to talk to people and learn about local successes and failures. By local, I mean a region, but I also mean your neighbors and people who have really similar conditions to you. Like Central Point by the Rogue River is really different from my property and my house in Holstein. It's similar, but it's also two different worlds. So that can be really helpful to learn, what did someone else choose? What did they do? Then more selecting species to suit site conditions. You want to think about site moisture, sun, what habitat is it? So are we talking oak savanna? Are we talking riparian area? All of that. Disturbance. Is this area going to be grazed? Is this area going to be walked on a ton? And there's also just a ton of these. I have some of them listed here. You can go on to soil pH, soil calcium level. I mean, those are, I would worry most about moisture, sunlight, habitat, and disturbance first. Worry about those first, and then other things are important, but they're kind of secondary, would be my thought. People might disagree with me on that though. So what are the pros and cons of getting seedlings, so seed plugs, versus seeds? So seeds are definitely less expensive. There's less labor to plant them. They're more available, and you can store them, not indefinitely. I'm sure people know this, but storing seeds, 20 years, it may or may not sprout depending on the species. And then plug pros, you tend to have a greater individual survival. So for each plant that goes in the ground, it's more likely to survive. I would argue, people would argue with me on this, greater planting time flexibility because they're already established. They're not waiting for whatever cues they need to decide that it's good time to germinate. So if you're sticking a plant in the ground, it's already there. It already has its roots. It has its leaf, and so it can get going. It's faster establishment. So you have a plant, and it will do something faster. It'll look like more your second year. So site preparation and planting, timing. I keep talking about that. So you want to reduce the negative impacts you'll have on desirable species. So like instead of plowing a whole area, for instance, which, you might instead want to do strips, or you might instead want to go around desirable stuff you already have. Weed control is really important. So can these native perennial grass species compete with invasive species? That was the question. They're not great. Some of them are better than others, but it is useful and helpful at most sites. Different sites are different. So higher elevation sites, there tends to be less weed pressure. If you have something special going on, like serpentine soil, again, less weed pressure. But generally, these native perennial grasses, particularly when they're babies, need a helping hand from us. So weed control. But don't leave the ground just bare for a long time, because then you get things like erosion, and it's a perfect seed bed for weeds. Weeds really like disturbed soil. What to do the first year or so? Reduce disturbances. It's like your newly planted lawn. Walking on it can hurt it. So, maybe don't reduce how much you're walking on it the first year. Reduce if you're grazing it the first year. Potentially, if you have a bunch of deer around, you might even put something that in theory will attract the deer somewhere else or make the deer not like your area. I know that's a really, really tall ask. And then weed control, I think, still is important. Make sure you're not killing off the seedlings you just planted. And then other management. Generally speaking, from what I've learned, things such as fertilizing or watering it during the summer, those can actually benefit all of your weedy species more than your native species. So consider, but be careful. And then these are perennials. So sometimes you won't be able to see them. They'll die back to the ground, but they're still there. They're still alive. And so they'll be resprouting. So don't just assume that you planted it, it's dead, it's never coming back. Sometimes it's dead, it's never coming back. But sometimes it still might be there. It just might be really small. So don't lose heart too early. Funding for doing these projects might be available. This is not the area where I have a bunch of expertise, but I know the natural resource conservation districts have them. U.S. Fish and Wildlife have them. Understory Initiative will sometimes have funding, and there's other sources out there too. So yes, you can spend your own money, but if you can get money to do this work, it potentially exists. I wanted to thank a bunch of people here. First, I received to get the seedlings, a small grant from the Center for Population Biology for to buy seedlings to give them out to you, and then to people who helped with this presentation and who donated the containers for me to plant things in. Also, thank you for Art for reading our quotes. And then thank you to Nicole and Marcy for making this whole thing happen, and to everyone who helped me set out the plants. Really, really appreciate it. And thank you for coming and for being interested in this. I'll have my contact information up on the screen, and then are there more questions?
Yeah, there is a comment and a question in the chat. I found that in oak woodlands, Bromer specie can thrive under canopy of white oaks, but the area right outside the drip line is covered with Medusa head. The good and the bad hold each other at bay at this battle line. A good example of microclimate influence on species selection. One of our participants. And then question, Catherine, have you seen any studies on how much seed predation by birds and rodents affects success of seeding?
Yeah. I both studies, but then also personal experience. Sometimes you put seed out and it turns into bird food. And so that is definitely a thing. So timing, planting, kind of roughing up the soil for the seeds. There's lots of people who say, do it this way, do it that way. But generally speaking, roughing up the soil and planting the seeds so they're not just on flat ground will help some. And then planting when the weather is right. So it's going to rain kind of right after, and the seeds can sprout, get going, and they're less attractive to be bird food. There's definitely studies out there. I can't list them offhand, but yes, people are thinking about that.
A couple of questions, Kathy. Thank you very much. What's the best competition for Bermuda grass? And then two, what would be the best substitute instead of just a lawn, a green lawn, which I love. I love the soft green lawn. What would you recommend?
Competition with Bermuda grass is a little bit hard. I think you have to help it out. Something that likes a similar habitat to Bermuda grass is probably my best suggestion. I'm not sure of exactly the species. It depends where you are and how you're managing that land. And then, what your second question? Oh, yeah. Substitute for soft lawn. Good question for the master gardeners class, I think. I think it depends where you are. Some of them it's use grasses, but then some I think can be like forb lawns, like I've seen thyme lawns and that type of thing. Just something that can handle the trampling and the mowing and you were expecting it to be green, so probably not one of these perennial grasses that goes dormant in the summer. So I think species depends on what you want. I don't know that I have a specific recommendation, but there's definitely some, don't choose that one.
You can also check out our Lawns and Meadows class on our YouTube channel. If you Google OSU Land Steward YouTube, you can go to the class series. You can find all our recordings. We make the recordings public after a few months, and you can check it on the Lawns and Meadows one.
Thank you, Nicole.
Questions?
I would just want to let everybody know that you talked about the seeds on top of the ground, which is in the ground a little bit. Jackson Soil and Water has two, no-till drills and some tractors that they run out every year. And it's a minimal cost to rent them out. And if they install, it doesn't disturb the soil, but then it's expensive.
I might take advantage of that one. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Did you say one of these, gets to be 5 to 6?
One of the ones on the table, I think 5 feet was the tallest, but yeah.
Which one was that?
I believe that it is the blue wild rye that gets to be really tall. That's the, I think, the tallest one of them.
Jackson Soil Water Conservation District. That's a no-till or low-till.
They have two no-till drills, one of the large ones for the pasture, other one small ones for the small.
A large and small
They have compactors.
low-till drill and then compactor, so you can hook that to your tractor, right, Ron?
Tractor, you have a side by side.
Or side by side.
Or a small.
A small long tractor or side by side with something that the district will rent out.
And it's cheap, right? You can rent
Affordable.
They have to be.
You're a small feeders for the care work of the tool. Any other questions? Yeah. Can the native perennial grasses be divided? If you have some growing in your yard, you want to spread them out a little faster.
I'm not sure. I think they can. I think most of them can. Quite a few of them will, but not all. Some kind of object to that. I tried it on some. I think I tried it on Idaho fescue at home, and it might have been unhappy that I dug it up. And it might be on me. It might be happy being divided. So some of them are, some of them aren't. I pick a time of year when it's more dormant, not doing anything super energy intensive. So, like summer, fallish might be a good time, even winter, but not spring when it's full growing, flowering. That I don't know for sure, but that would be my first thought.
And for those of you that are asking questions that Catherine may refer to the master gardeners, what you want to look up is the plant clinic. Your local master gardeners, you can Google county you're in, and they can give you answers or send you in different directions of different resources that you might not be able to answer. From the chat, I'm not super adept in searching databases, but CalFlora has a feature which probably has a YouTube tutorial called What Grows Here. I think you can use that tool to find what species occur in what locale, whether it includes what could grow there. Then I would start Googling. And the tool would be applicable to the Klamath region or similar biomes in California, such as oak chaparral.
There's also a tool that Oregon Flora has that's pretty similar to that. Calscape also has some tools like that. I don't know if they have YouTube tutorials. If they don't, they should. So that might be a good project.
All right, are there any other questions? I'm gonna walk away from my computer, but if you are on Zoom and have a question, please add it on in. I'm just gonna pass on some words of wisdom from years of working roadsides and seeding them. We had best luck in the fall when we follow the natural seeds drop and then fall rains, and then they'll do their cold moist over the winter and sprouting in the spring. And I found when moving here, the same thing. I did a spring seeding and I did a fall seeding, and the fall seeding came in better. It's hydro seeding both times. And when you're hydro seeding, usually you'll have a contractor and you want to be sure they have a tackifier, which just helps the seeds stick to the soil. So when we get our dry winds, it doesn't all go away.
Thank you. Does anyone else have advice? I'm sure there's a lot of people that have knowledge in this room. Please.
From a seed forager for many, many years. What I do is I'll go out to any of the natural areas and with the intention of collecting a handful of seed, but what I do is I also distribute it on the earth. So I say a prayer and I distribute the seed. So I'm collecting, but I'm also giving back. And I never necessarily think of 10% or what, but it's that when I take the seed, I also put it back. And of course, we have a small property, so we're never taking very much. It's not like we're trying to seed a prairie, you know, it's just a small private property.
Thank you. Any other pieces of advice or questions? I'm gonna check the chat. I'm getting my steps in today. I don't see anything else in the chat. Catherine, what is next up on your agenda?
I think there might be someone over.
I missed one.
I just think it's good to think about soil tests, so that you have the right soil pH and conditions, like when the grass is going, so something else.
Great soil tests, make sure you have the appropriate soils for the plants, the grasses you are planting.
So I heard you say that the leaves will take over. How long does that take to happen?
Depends on the,
Like a year
it
or
depends on the
a season?
conditions, not a season probably. But yeah, it depends on the conditions. In some areas you would be happy if they take over, and then other areas you'd be less happy. Okay, well, next on my agenda was to have everyone look at the plants up here. I have some information printed off the internet about more about these particular species. I'll also be on hand. And to sign up if you're interested in either seeds or plugs. And then if I could get some help coming up with a fair way to distribute this, and then we can get you out the door, hopefully with your seedlings or seeds.
So if you are a land steward volunteer, you have just volunteered yourself to help with passing out and distributing some of these seedlings, helping Catherine. If you are joining us on the Zoom, you are welcome to stay signed in and kind of listen in. And Catherine, if you don't mind keeping that on,
Sure.
that way they can hear any questions that come up as folks are going. Or you are welcome to sign off. I will keep the recording going. If there's anything else, questions pop up to folks, thank you again for joining us and thank you, Catherine, for coming all the way up here from UC Davis.